get on to our panel discussion. I'm going to have a chat with the 4 people who are with me up on the main stage, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. So we'll take questions collectively, and you can ask them what you want. We've got Frank McGovern here from the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, Frank is going to be speaking after the panel discussion, so we can't really juice him. He wants to save some of the exciting stuff he has, so we'll give Frank an easy ride. We've then got Eamon Ryan, former Minister for Energy, and will be a candidate for the Green Party in the general election next year. So obviously he's got insight into how some things worked and didn't work, so we can follow up on that. We've also got Dave Fitzgerald, who's joining us from Dairygold. So once again, we want to try and ensure that we had companies also able to give us their insight into how things were going. And then we've also got Mr. Ria from the Carbon Trust, who gave us a speech earlier on for 20 minutes from the main stage. But we want not just to talk about what the Carbon Trust does for companies, but also maybe where some of the commercial advantages are going to open up. Where is the opportunity? Where are we able to go with some of it? And we're on something of an economy. We're going to have one mic, so we're just going to pass it up and down the line, which might make it a little bit more difficult for interaction. And then we will have a roving mic in a few minutes. But Frank McGovern from the EPA, if I can ask you first, if you can give us, where are we when it comes to carbon emissions vis-a-vis sort of 2020, and how are we going to achieve those targets?
Thank you very much, Paul, and I think I must congratulate the organisers on having a very interesting and entertaining conference so far, so I hope we'll keep that up for this discussion here. In terms of 2020 and 2030 and I suppose 2050, I'll be talking about that after this, but as you know, the EU is on a trajectory to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 95% by 2050, and it has established a target of 40% reductions by 2030, and we are working our way through the 2020 climate and energy package, which Ireland has emissions reductions relative to 2005 levels. The EPA projections suggest that Ireland will meet those targets if, and the caveat is very strong, if all of the additional measures in terms of uptake of biofuels, efficiency, renewable energies are achieved in full. So from a national perspective, we are on track to meet those targets if all of the policies are fully implemented. However, the bad news is that we will be in the wrong trajectory as we come to 2020, because meeting the targets is quite, as a typical EU directive, it's quite complicated, and there is banking. So we're ahead of target right now in terms of our emissions because of we're still working through, I guess, some of the recession activities, but our emissions are projected to turn up in the coming years unless we take additional measures.
Okay. We started off the conference on the main stage this morning with an address by the French ambassador, because the UN climate change talks are going to take place there next month. And there is a sense, following on from the disaster of Copenhagen in 2009, that there could be an overarching deal on the question of greenhouse gases in Paris this time out. Eamon, can I ask you just to give a sense, how optimistic are you that a deal will be done? And what type of deal do you think it will be?
Okay. Well, I suppose I work, as well as my role as leader of the Green Party, I work with an organisation in London called E3G, Third Generation Environmentalism, a not-for-profit climate and sustainability organisation, and they're very involved in the whole climate diplomacy. What they say to me, or from what I hear my colleagues there, is we are likely to get a deal, and it will get us over that terrible disaster that Copenhagen was in terms of a complete retreat from any ambition for action on climate. It will not be the right deal, it will not be sufficient deal, but at least it sets us, I think, on a path where we can get the right sort of deal. There has to be a review in the process, and I think if that is included, the very active countries starting, 146 haven't given their estimate of what they want to do. Is an America and China now be willing to kind of start on the path, even if it's not sufficient in my eyes? That very act of the main players agreeing to go on a path towards decarbonising the system is a very positive step. I'd have to say, and you can maybe say I'm kind of domestically political on this, I think the real tragedy is in that process. Just as the rest of the world and Europe and others are actually going aggressively, or starting to go on a path, what I call kind of a pilgrimage path, the Irish government is rocking up and saying, well, we're going to drive for the first week. We'll see in 2030 or 2040 where we might join you with ambition. And I think that's a real problem for this country. It's a problem in terms of just moral authority, but it's also a problem in terms of missing out on the economic opportunity that will arise for those countries which are part of that transition that is about to start. And I think that's the real problem I have, is we do not have any political commitment here at the moment in Ireland to lead that process. And I think that's a shame. It's a shame in a range of different ways. And I think that's what, for me, the big question in Paris is, how can an Irish government turn up under the European cover, pretend something's happening, when the reality of what we're doing here on the ground, in reality, is going in the exact opposite direction?
I'm sure Alan Kelly would have a few words to say about it as he heads out to negotiate in Paris. But can I ask you, Dave, just because it brings into the question of, we did have a dip in economic activity, which has led to an easing of our emissions problems. And now the economy is picking up in certain sectors, obviously not for everyone. But when it comes to food, that's one of the big areas. We've got changes in EU law dealing with milk quotas. So that further opens opportunities. But how can you be sustainable and also be able to expand and develop and take and grasp those chances as they're coming forward, from your perspective?
Yes, so in terms of Dairygold, we're a dairy company involved in producing dairy food ingredients. And in the last couple of years, we've made a major investment in our milk processing facilities, so 117 million across 2 of our plants. And one of the things that we've had to consider, obviously, are the targets going forward. So we would be part of EU emissions trading, for example, and we would have carbon targets under emissions trading. And as part of that, we needed to look at the design of those plants, to look at, where the processing capacity was going, and what degree of energy efficiency we needed to build into those. So a significant portion of that investment would have been in, drying technologies, efficient drying technologies with heat recovery, with energy efficient pumps, with technologies like mechanical vapor recompression. So that's to try and future-proof our business against, the carbon reduction targets that we're going to have to meet. Now, it won't go all the way. It will help us on the journey to 2020 and maybe beyond. But beyond that, then you're looking at, being a very heat-intensive business, renewable energy. And I think that's an area that businesses are going to increasingly have to look at. And particularly for heat-intensive industries, renewable heat is very important. And I was encouraged to see that there is recently emerging a policy on renewable heat in Ireland, and hopefully some funding around that as well. So, Dairygold have invested in anaerobic digestion on one of our plants, so it's supplying 6% of the thermal needs of the plant now. So that's, it's a start, but I think we'll have to go further down that journey, in the medium to long term.
And if I could just ask you to follow up on that, because much of what we learned from the other examples, the other studies through the programme, was that much of what was being done made sense anyway. It makes sense to reduce your energy bill. It makes sense to do these things. So even irrespective of the green agenda, it's commercial. Can you tell us something about how, as those laws increases and you're put under further pressure, it still enables you to be able to boost your business? I guess that's the trick that everyone's trying to look at. How can you, as the targets get higher and the restrictions become more apparent, how are you going to work your way through it? Is governments going to be working with you or effectively against you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things on that. In terms of, sustainability and where you position yourself, do you, wait for the regulation to come and then comply essentially, or do you try and get ahead of that? I think in terms of carbon, obviously there's a cost associated with carbon, so you build that into your business cases. You got to look forward as well on carbon and say, where's that price going to be in 5 years' time and 10 years' time? But also commercially, it's something that our customers are looking for. So we'd be very much a business-to-business organisation, and the big multinationals that we supply, they're looking for, the consumers are asking them, what are you doing on sustainability? And they want their suppliers to help them with that story. So if you want strategically to be, in that value-add space where you're supplying big customers, you really need to have sustainability on your, in your strategy. You need to be getting ahead with it and not just towing the line and sort of just complying with the basic regulatory piece.
Thanks. If I can come to Michael Rea from the Carbon Trust. We were talking earlier on about what you could do for businesses, how you can assist them and help them. But just from your overview, dealing right around the world and with so many different companies in all sectors, where do you think the emerging opportunities are going to come for business? Where are the things that are going to explode, or indeed maybe even sectors we don't know very much about?
I suppose as a starting point, if you go back to what we're saying about emissions targets, we have a target to reduce emissions in the EU by 40% by 2030. That's a very big change, 95% by 2050. That's a fundamental change. And I agree. I do think there will be a deal in Paris that will move things on very significantly, which means that those targets will therefore need to be delivered. And in that context of massive emission reduction, I think that creates fundamental questions for businesses in Europe and around the world about kind of what type of strategy do you take, first of all. Are you a follower, or do you get ahead of the game? From a Carbon Trust point of view, in terms of creating value and managing the risk, we very much advocate getting ahead of the game. And that's the only way, I think, to both manage sustainability and to create long-term shareholder value. But more specifically to your question about where we see opportunity, I think there's the obvious sectors of energy efficiency is still a huge opportunity in markets around the world. Low carbon technology supply, be it renewables or other things. Linked to that, storage. Lots of very interesting emerging technologies around the areas of storage. Electric vehicles, they're the obvious ones. But in some ways, the less obvious ones, food. Food ultimately has to be sustainable. And it's really great that, Ireland is a leader in this particular area. But other countries are catching up, and I think we're very lucky as Carbon Trust to work in places like Brazil that have got a very big beef industry, and they're really looking hard to see how they can capture the opportunity in this move and thinking about this not as a cost, but as an opportunity. And I think that's the fundamental point for me. The world is increasingly thinking about this shift as a business opportunity, and be it in Ireland or be it anywhere else, I think business is going to prosper when they put that opportunity lens on rather than the lens of cost or compliance.
I'll come back to Frank in a moment just on that question of Ireland and its record and how it's managing to achieve the targets, because it's not just getting the targets, how you do it is obviously a matter of contention. But one of the things we did see this year was that the Dutch government was sued by its own citizens who said that the government was talking about doing stuff but not actually getting around to it. Do you find or get the sense that these laws which have been agreed but not necessarily adhered to are finally going to have some teeth, and that you can't just sign a document, you're actually going to have to follow it to the letter?
Well, I think, again, going back to Paris and the fact that we will have a global deal, I think is going to make policymakers come forward with new measures that are going to accelerate progress. We're also seeing consumers increasingly engaged in this agenda and expecting their governments and their businesses to actually bring forward products and services that are truly sustainable. Investors I think are not as advanced as we would like from a Carbon Trust perspective, but again, kind of becoming increasingly kind of interested in the subject. So for a whole range of reasons, not just kind of regulation, as you say, the business case for businesses to act in a meaningful way, not about incremental improvement, but about step change improvement is increasingly strong. And I think we are going to see a real step change over the next 10 years or so.
Frank, just on the targets and how they're achieved.
Targets and how they're achieved, obviously there's a lot of discussion at various sector levels in terms of what additional policies can be identified and how these can be implemented. We're actually at a very interesting juncture in terms of climate policy in Ireland, because there's obviously a bill which is going through the Dáil and Senate at the moment and should be enacted hopefully before we get to Paris. And that bill puts an emphasis on each of the sectors to look closely at what it's doing and to come back and provide a national mitigation plan. Now, that plan should be coherent with the policy statement, and I don't know how many people here are familiar with the national policy statement that was produced a few years back, which says that Ireland should reduce its carbon dioxide emissions by up to 80% or at least 80% by 2050, and that's carbon dioxide across all of the sectors, transport, housing and energy, and looking towards carbon neutrality for the agriculture sector. So that's, at a national level, that's a very, I suppose, ambitious statement, which I think sends a strong signal to the various sectors about what they should be thinking of, because in terms of meeting targets, it's easy to get caught up on just looking to the next target, 2020, then 2030. But strategically, all of the sectors and all of the businesses need to think long term. And I think that's one of the key messages coming from this meeting, is that you should think strategically, in a sense, in a visionary manner, about your business model, your sectoral model, your locality model. How will that transition work? And come up, look at the opportunities rather than just the carrots and the sticks that are out there.
Eamon, I know you want to come back on that, but also in your answer, can you also give some insight? You're part of the Green Movement. The Green Movement is very integrated right across. So what opportunities do you see from some of the other colleagues you would have in other European countries about business opportunities and how things can be pushed on?
And I don't want to be too party political on this, but just to back up the point I was making earlier about how we don't have political ambition here at the moment. And the same week that the climate bill went through the Dáil, and almost every single TD voted yes, we're doing great. And we are doing well in some sectors. But in the same week we put it through, the government came out and said we're going to keep burning peat for another 15 years. Until there's not a sod of turf left in the Midlands, we're going to burn a lot of it effectively. And there's no way you can do that and be serious about climate. And you ask about the Green Movement, where it's going, and what's the pressure going to be. Bill McKibben and the like is leading the Green Movement. And it's changing from the emphasis on the end-use person, are you buying the right thing, are you burning the right thing, to look at the source of the problem, fossil fuels, to say, I'm sorry, you can't dig up the fossil fuel, you can't use it. We got to stop burning the planet, we got to love life and stop burning it up. So if we're serious, or where we're going to come from political pressure, whatever about our bill, we cannot keep burning peat. Secondly, the exact same time that the climate bill went through, the government came out and said, well, it comes to public transport in Dublin, I'm afraid, sorry, we're going to have to wait another 15 years at least before we do the big public transport projects we need. And we're like Houston, Texas in terms of the sprawl of the city. It's the same in Galway, same in Limerick, same in Cork, spreading out. We're not doing the fundamental shift that we need to be if we were serious about the climate bill, to bring our cities back in close, allow people to walk to work, cycle to work, get buses, to make it a really genuine low-carbon cities that are going to be successful in the new economy, the ones that people are going to choose to go to. And we didn't do that. We have no plan for public transport, second major one you'd need. The third one, and we are good in renewable energy in the electricity side, and everything's going to go electric in my mind, and we have a potential, real opportunity there to turn our high level of variable power, our competitive advantage in renewable power, to be really good at this dance that's going to have to develop between efficiency and variable supply, variable demand, variable supply. That's where the big economic opportunity is opening up. We could grab that, we could lead that, we could tie our tech sector. We should have the Web Summit today down here saying, how are you going to use the internet to become the world leading place for efficiency, for that dance between generation and supply? And that's where in Europe and everywhere, that's the real thing everyone's looking at. But instead, again, the same week the climate bill went through, EirGrid comes out and says, we're not going to build the grid to the southeast. Because we all know, let's be honest, whatever's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, the way that Midland project went, we've lost the Irish people on wind, we've lost the Irish people on grid. Like, you know this. Come on, it's not false, I'm not dreaming this up. You see it in prime time, one program after the other, dun dun dun, it's going to give you leukemia. Dun dun dun, wind is going to kill our country. When we have the best wind resource in the world and we have the potential, we are bloody good at it in terms of integrating it and knowing how you run a synchronized system. That's the big opportunity, the alternative to burning the peat. And our government has walked away from it because it's politically sensitive, partly because Fine Gael and Labour are leading the campaigns in the Midlands and elsewhere not to build the grid to the north, which we need to do. So until we tackle, and honestly, some of those issues, I'm sorry, climate bill, yeah, it's great, but it doesn't actually, it's the right structure, but it doesn't have ambition. It doesn't take that target, that 80% target, and say, we're going to do it. And if we were serious about it, what it means, by 2050, at the end of my lifetime, we have a 100% zero carbon energy system. That's doable. If we went for it, this would be the best country in the world in so many different ways. It would benefit us employment-wise, economically, morally, identity, how we see ourselves as a country, the centre of the solutions or the centre of the problem. At the moment, you go to Europe, they mention 2 countries as falling behind, Poland and Ireland. That's not good.
I'm going to come to the audience. One sec. Yeah, I'm going to come to the audience. I'm just going to give them one more spin through. Rather than me asking questions, I'm just going to pass the mic down to you, Michael, and you can pass it between each other. I mean, one thing, and the question I wanted to ask is, and this would have happened under your time when you were in government as well, the battle over the question of, say, something like renewable energy wasn't lost, you know, in 2011. There have been battles on the question of renewable energy all the way through your time. And the question has to be is, well, how are you going to be able to link this thing between a government policy which is signed up and people on the ground who just don't like it, don't want it, don't see the advantage of it? And you can put it and say we're all NIMBYs and we want it over there but not over here. But if we turn it into a positive, how is it that you're going to make that connection between the policy, which is pretty clear, and the public who've got a long distance away to go? Michael, if you could kick off with that.
I mean, I think we have, as Carbon Trust, some experience of this in the UK context, because we have an onshore wind development business that's primarily developing wind farms in the forests of Scotland. And this business, PFR, we've taken a different approach in terms of community engagement. So we actually develop projects very, very slowly with a view to building buy-in from the local community. And you know, while we haven't been successful in all cases, I think our very different business model is making progress. Because I think if you take the time to engage local communities and to explain and indeed to give them a share of ownership of these farms, you may get a different dynamic. And I think, as we were saying earlier as well, in terms of kind of energy supply, there are different models we can deploy going forward. We can have a very centralist approach, or we can have a much more distributed approach where communities take accountability for generating and using their own energy and using it efficiently and benefiting economically and socially from that. And it is a very different model. And I think Ireland is of a scale with the drop in cost of renewable technologies, with the emergence of storage technologies, with the emergence of electrical vehicle technologies that are not quite there but not far away. There is a real opportunity, I think, to take a very different approach and to do something that will be sustainable in the long term.